So welcome back to the Marketing Schematic. We have a very exciting episode planned for today. We're pivoting a little bit from our normal marketing talk and instead kind of talking on something that is very crucial to business growth and business development in manufacturing companies, and that is culture. So we'll be talking about what defines culture, how manufacturers can position themselves to start building a positive internal culture, and the business case for prioritizing culture. So we are thrilled to have Jim Mayer, host of the Manufacturing Culture Podcast, join us on this episode. I'll give you a little bio. Jim is your answer to turning a just okay workplace environment to one where everyone thrives. Founder of TCO Strategies, Jim uses his 20 years of skilled trades experience to offer culture consultations, interviews, and strategies to turn manufacturing companies into workplaces that thrive on motivated people and innovation. Beyond the office, Jim hosts a podcast that I mentioned, Manufacturing Culture Podcast, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But in the show, he talks with industry leaders about how they're cultivating amazing culture inside manufacturing companies. So, Jim, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Hi, Ann. Hey, Chad.
Hey.
Thank you for having me. This is so awesome. It's so weird to be on this side of an interview, but it's really exciting. So thanks for having me.
It's like nervous excitement to have a real life podcast host on our podcast because we're still,
I know.
Listen, episode 10. We're still trying to figure it out here.
I know. We're still new to the game here.
Constructive criticism, welcome, Jim, for sure.
Hey, you guys are doing a great job. Like I was saying before we started recording, what Ann has done as far as setting up is light years beyond where I was or am even right now. I'm still new to the game too, right? As of us recording, I have 54 episodes out. So I haven't even been in this podcast thing for a while myself, but I will say it was within my first 10 episodes that I had my similar moment where I kind of geeked out because I had Megan Jimba on the podcast,
Right.
And I fanboyed over Megan so hard because, you know, Mavens of Manufacturing is just an amazing series and show and whatever.
Yeah.
And so to have somebody that I was talking to that I looked up to was like, oh my God, this is amazing, right? So I get where you're coming from.
Yes.
I felt super uncomfortable with the compliment. You could see my face go way redder than it is right now, Chad, but thank you very much.
Hey, I mean, it's awesome to have you on, and we're very excited to not only learn from you about culture, but see how you do on a podcast and take that back to the studio for us and kind of work on things. So
absolutely. Awesome.
Yeah, so I'll give a little backstory too to how we first met. So I came across your booth at the WIMTS show, Wisconsin Manufacturing and Technology Show.
Yeah.
And kind of going back to just, you know, looking up to you, I saw your booth on the second day and I was like, whoa, like this guy's got it like figured out. He's got a whole recording studio. You were in like a prime location by like the concessions. And then the second day I mustered up the courage. I was like, Martha, who's our marketing coordinator, is like, we got to go talk to this guy and see what he's all about. And you were so friendly and so nice. And I was because we are still new to the podcast game. I was a little nervous to see what you were like, but you're so friendly and very personable.
Oh, thank you very much. And if you had come the first day, you would have seen me at a point where I was almost in tears. I don't know if I had shared that story with you guys.
I know you said setup was a little tricky the first day.
Oh my God. I thought I had everything that I needed to go from recording remotely at home to going out into the field. And I was horribly wrong. It's completely different equipment that you need. And I could get either the video to work, but not the sound, or the sound to work, but not the video, or sometimes neither at all. So I lost the entire first day. There was a moment where I walked outside of the convention center and I looked at my hotel and I thought, I could just leave. Nobody really, I didn't interview anybody. Nobody knows I was here. I could just go, right? Close to tear, but I made it through, got a couple of interviews in while I was there, learned a lot of lessons from those failures. And now I'm a lot stronger moving forward, going out into the field. I have the right equipment, all of that kind of fun stuff. So, but that introduction, I looked up and I was still fighting with the equipment, and you had this bright smile on your face and you introduced yourself, and there was no way that I could keep my anger at my own misgivings inside anymore. And you were there. It really was a spark of sunshine in a rather cloudy day. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it was serendipitous,
Absolutely.
Cool. So we like to kick off the show with a little icebreaker. Chad, do you want to preface this, or do you want me to just go ahead and jump right in?
Well, I mean, it's a quick build-up, right? I think the thing I'm always telling Anne in our day-to-day and meetings, and I have been for a couple of years now, is that she has the ability to travel and or live and work anywhere she wants. So no mortgage, no children. We have
no
a
dog.
cat, I guess. A cat is in the picture, but cats can be moved pretty easily, I feel like.
That's easy.
And so I'm always projecting onto her that I am kind of tied down with kids and a life that I love very much. But I tell her, get out there, go be anywhere that you can before all that stuff starts to happen. While you can do it. And so the question that then we came up with has to do with travel and where would you go? And I'll let you ask the question.
Okay. Yeah,
that's where it comes from.
Travel recommendations welcome. What's one of the coolest places you've been? Where would you go back, or where would you recommend someone travel to?
Wow. So I have a hard time keeping answers to one answer. So I've got a couple here for you. So we're privileged enough to have family that lives in some pretty amazing places. So my in-laws live in San Diego. We live in Arizona, so we're here in Phoenix. My in-laws live in San Diego. My dad and my stepmom live in northwestern Colorado, outside of Steamboat Springs. My mom and brother and his family live in Asheville, North Carolina. My grandparents used to live in Hawaii. So we had the privilege to be able to go literally anywhere in the US. That is some beautiful places, right?
Right. And also different from one another.
Yeah, I was going to say, you've got all the climates or coasts covered there.
Yeah, exactly. As far as where do I love without having to visit family, I guess, because when you vacation and visit family, it's a much different vacation than it is when you just go somewhere. My wife and I went a couple of years ago to Puerto Vallarta, and we fell in love. It's a really quick, cheap flight on Southwest of all airlines out of Phoenix here. It's tucked into the mountains. It's super safe. It's the people there are amazing. So Puerto Vallarta is definitely high on my list. This summer, we're taking a trip to Italy. We're going to travel basically from Naples and southern Italy all the way up to Milan. And so looking forward to that, exploring the Italian countryside, if it were, trying a lot of different wines. And it's a memorial trip for my sister-in-law. So it'll be a very special trip. My wife and kids and I are going to go on. And so looking forward to that. So
that's awesome.
That was a really roundabout answer, which I hate when my guests don't answer concisely. So I apologize.
No, I think it's great.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Puerto Vallarta. Is that how you say
Puerto
that?
Puerto Vallarta. Yeah.
That'll go on the list. Italy's definitely been on the list, but it might be another decade.
That's because I've been telling my wife and I did Italy in May. So we did Rome up to Venice for about 13 days. And yeah, it was amazing.
A couple of years ago, I did a trip. We flew into Munich and then took trains and buses from Munich down to Milan. And we visited different manufacturers. So this was without my family, without my wife. This was with when I was with the NTMA, National Tooling and Machining Association, we took a bunch of our members, thanks to the sponsorship of some great companies, Big Kaiser and Speroni and some others. But we got to visit the Heidenhain factory outside of Munich and the Grobe factory. Blaser. I mean, we just got to see really cool stuff, got to see how workforce development is done in other countries. It was just a really neat trip. We actually got stopped by a avalanche in the Swiss Alps.
Wow.
Covered the tracks, and the Italians didn't want to clean up the Swiss mess, and the Swiss said that it was an Italian mess, and so
Wow.
we were literally under an awning of a gas station in a tiny town in the Swiss Alps, and drinking Swiss beer and schnapps until a bus could come pick us up and take us to the next train station around the avalanche zone. It was wild, but a super awesome, memorable trip.
What an adventure.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Sounds magical.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah. I've got a photo here somewhere. I don't know where it is. I'll find it.
Very cool. All right. Well, with all that travel talk checked off our list here, now we can get into the real stuff, the culture things. So I wanted to just start off by asking you, Jim, a little bit about how you fell into culture. How did that passion come about? Where did that journey begin?
Yeah, so it's kind of ironic that we go way back. Actually, it's to that trip that I just mentioned. So that's kind of cool. Serendipitous that those questions align like that. I had finished an MBA in 2016 in executive management, and part of my focus was leadership and engagement and culture. And so I was working for the NTMA and heard for the first time, I'd heard this in Arizona, and when you work in a bubble, you think that your bubble's the only one that exists. Right. So I'm now for the first time exposed to national organizations, companies outside of the state of Arizona, and they're talking about the same problems that everybody else was in the form of, hey, we can't find anybody who wants to work. And this is pre-COVID, right? This isn't like the narrative post-COVID. This is pre-COVID. Nobody wants to work anymore. And I got really tired of hearing people say that, because there's a wealth of people who want to work. There are people who need jobs. There are people who want to work. They just don't want to be treated like it's 1950 anymore, and paid like it's 1970. So I started measuring engagement on the side while I worked for the NTMA for manufacturers. Engagement levels, didn't do any insights with it, but just I was so tired of hearing that narrative from the members and from companies that I was working with that I wanted them to see, look, it's not necessarily that the market's dried up. It's that you're just not the place that people want to go work, right? And that's where marketing and culture really tie in, because you can build a really great culture. If you don't market your culture well enough, then you're really not doing your culture any good, right? So we can talk about that later. So I started doing these on the side, and was fairly successful doing that. I mean, it was a good little side hustle, and just started reading, learning a lot more about culture beyond what my schooling could provide. And then also I spent a lot of time in some companies that had bad cultures, right? And so you learn a lot about culture when you're in a bad one that doesn't celebrate you, or one that you don't fit with. And so over the years, I've learned how to simplify culture, right? Culture isn't this scary, massive thing. Every company has a culture, whether they know it or not. It's and it can literally be boiled down to, do your company values align with your employees' values? That is, in essence, the building blocks of culture. If your values align, your organization's values align with the company's values, then you have a healthy start to your culture, right? There's still a lot of elements that can build upon that, like leadership and career pathing and things of that nature that dictate whether it's going to ultimately be a healthy culture or give you engaged employees. But at the very most simplistic, if you have that alignment, then you've got a good start to your culture. Does that answer your question, Ann?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, very good.
And so now you have a whole podcast dedicated to this very topic. And so what kind of segued into that? You told me a little bit at the WIMTS show, but for any listeners, how did that come about?
Yeah, I'm the most reluctant podcaster in the world. I never wanted to be a podcaster. I grew up in the 90s. I'm born in the late 70s, grew up in the 90s when answering machines were a thing on a tape, right? You had to rewind the tape, but you could hear your voice. And that's the most miserable sound in the world, is hearing your own voice. I don't know many people who like it, right? But I had the pleasure, you guys are both much younger than I, so I don't know if you remember answering machines, but you had to like record your voice and then play it back and make sure you didn't mess up.
Press a little button on the inside of like the flip part.
Yeah, exactly. So the story behind the podcast is in 22, I was doing a marketing campaign, email drip campaign for TCO Strategies, for the consulting side. And was talking in this campaign about soft skills and how they relate to company culture. And I got so many negative responses, and everything from, F you, to people politicizing soft skills. You must be a liberal snowflake if you believe in soft skills, right? Like just some of the dumbest stuff I've ever heard. And ultimately it's because those people are afraid of change, right? But for every 4 or 5 of those bad emails, I got emails from people who said, hey, we've got a great culture. Here's what we do. Here's how we do it. And I started calling these companies and these leaders, and their stories were so awesome. And there's so much good going on in our industry that a lot of people don't know about because we're all stuck in our own little bubbles, right? And unless they're active on LinkedIn or other social media channels, you don't really hear about culture in our industry and where people are culturally. So I was telling a good friend at the Women in Manufacturing Summit in Atlanta in 22 this story, and she said, you've got to start a podcast. You got to get these stories out there. I said, fat chance, man. That's not going to happen. And she challenged me to do so, and I sat on it, didn't act. A lot of it was imposter syndrome, I guess is right. I'd never done it before. Why would anybody in their right mind want to listen to me talk about culture on their iPhone while they're driving anywhere? Right. That's the dumbest thing in the world. Nobody wants to listen to me. And so I put it off, and she sent me a text, a little kick in the shorts, and said, hey, I haven't seen anything. I haven't heard anything. Are you going to do this or not? So I had a day in December of 22 that I wasn't doing anything. And I said, okay. So I built a website in a couple hours, just easy, simple build of a website, announced it on LinkedIn. And within like 24 hours, I had 60 some odd people who wanted to be guests and tell their stories and talk about their organizations and all of that, to the point where I haven't even made it through the list of people who
that initial list.
Exactly. I've got a notebook here in front of me. I don't have it turned to the page, but I still have the page in here with all of those names written down.
How cool is that?
So I said, okay, I'll do it for 3 months, and I'll release an episode a week for 3 months. If I get burnt out, if it's too time consuming, if it's not providing anything useful to the industry, I'll be one of those podcasts that burn out, right? And there's a lot of podcasts, I mean, the majority don't make it past episode 10. So congratulations, Anne. You guys have made it past 10. And released the first 5 or 6 episodes. I was recording at that point. I was recording on Fridays, releasing the Thursday after. I didn't have any backlog. I didn't have any buffer. It was killing me. Just the time that it took. Nobody thinks about the time that it takes to put a podcast together. And so I did it, and I was like, man, this is not going to go anywhere because I'm killing myself. It's too time consuming. And then about 6 episodes in, I got a message from a woman in the middle of nowhere in a manufacturing facility. And she goes, hey, I love your podcast. Every week, it brings, joy to listen to the intro that you do for these people. I am giving tips to my leader based on what I'm hearing. And it was like, oh no,
now you're in it.
Now I'm in it.
You have a loyal following.
I do.
Yeah.
And it just, now it keeps happening, right? Every time I'm like, I'll hang it up, right? I'll get an email from somebody. I got an email from a student 2 or 3 months ago, and they said, hey, I just listened to one of your back episodes. It was, Boston centerless Steve Tomasi. Sounds like an amazing person to work for. I'm not doing anything in my hometown. Would love a change of scenery. Can you make the introduction?
Nice.
Sure. Steve will love that, right? So I made the introduction. I have a couple of schools that listen on Fridays as they're doing work in their tech centers, right? They put it on a who wants to listen to me? Like, it's the weirdest thing in the world. And now I've got people like, I don't know if you on LinkedIn, Nusrat Ahmed. She is somebody who came out of nowhere on LinkedIn like 3 months ago, to the point where I thought she was a bot. I didn't think she was an actual human being. She reached out. She posted all this stuff about the podcast. I was like, this has got to be a bot. There's no way. And so I reached out, just, hey, thanks for posting. How long have you been listening? She's like, I've listened to every episode. And I was like, do you want to jump on a call? And we jumped on a call, and I said, we got to talking, and she's a 20-year-old who went to the NASCAR Race Institute or Mechanics, and I don't know, NASCAR something Institute of Technology, where she learned how to be a machinist and a mechanic and all this stuff. I was like, hey, do you want to be on the podcast? And she screamed in my ear, and she's like, no way, stop it. And it's just, it's that kind of impact that all of a sudden I'm seeing that I'm having out there. And it gives me goosebumps. Like, I never thought that I would be able to impact the industry in such a positive way just by talking to people, which is a natural skill set for me. So here we are. I'm having a blast with it.
Yeah. So cool. I mean, it's not a surprise to me at all that like your podcast has drawn attention and people, follow it. I feel like culture is always important, but it's especially timely, I guess, right now with, labor shortages and things like that. It's really surprising to me that first email that you sent out, that the reaction was so mixed, because I just think, I don't know, that, like I said, this is really timely. So,
yeah.
Well, what I've found is there are really 3 groups of people when it comes to culture. People who believe in soft skills, who believe in culture, who are willing to make that change because they value the humans that work for them, right? And so either they are already in the process of some cultural change, or they know that they need to get there. Then you have the second group who they know they need to change. They know that having a good culture will help them, but they're embarrassed to start. They don't want to be viewed as having something wrong with their organization, right?
Right.
And then there's a third group of people who just don't care. And
or just denial.
And to them, they view their employees as being fortunate to have a job
Right. You're here to
versus,
do a job and you're lucky you have it, kind of a
yeah, exactly.
mindset. Yeah.
Instead of feeling I'm lucky to have you because you're the most skilled person that I could have for this role, right?
Right.
If owners start changing that mindset to think instead of the employees are lucky to have this job, you're very fortunate to have this employee.
Right.
That's a great first step to a cultural change, or at least a journey that they
Which
can go down.
Ann kind of mentioned labor shortages there a little bit, and that kind of forced people's hand a little bit to it kind of
Mhm.
flipped it, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, I
Yeah.
am lucky to have you, not just from a cultural standpoint, but from I can't find anyone like you to be able to do this. So,
And it's not going to get any better.
no,
Right.
right.
Right. I think the job market is saying like, I demand these things, like, and I don't have to work for you. You know, I have a pool of options. So,
Right.
and we talk to clients who ask us all the time about like, can you help us with recruitment marketing and support us in that? And it's the same thing if you're trying to find a customer, but your website says nothing about what makes you great. Like,
Absolutely.
if an prospective employee comes to your website and is looking, and it's like, you're not talking about your culture, you're not showing real faces, real team members, what it's like to work there, what are your values, like it's the same premise basically. So yeah.
Well, and let's be real, not a whole lot of manufacturers need a website to get new business, right?
Right.
Job shops, they don't need a website to get more business. They need to go be part of associations. They need to network. They need to be at their current customers, right? It's a different marketing channel for them. Their website should 100% be about why it is the best place to work for
Right.
any person, right? Talk
Well,
about
what
your
we
value.
typically say with like a website in that situation is the website is there not to attract people, but to be that kind of step where people will come in and say, okay, this company is legit. They look like a real company that can do the work that I need. Or where you were going is they look like a real company in a place that I want to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just a change from and we still see it with a lot of shops, right? They've got a static page that's just got a list of their machines and a list of their capabilities. And to them, that's their website.
That's
right?
it.
Yeah.
Right.
Might have their address and phone number at the bottom, but that's it.
An email
Right.
link or something. Yep. That's it.
Kind of just a checklist item.
Yeah, exactly.
We still unfortunately host some of those sites that are out there, but we're working on those people, right?
Yeah. Slowly but surely. It's a slowly embracing, the digital era. And I think it's a slow embrace a little bit too of, culture as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Telltale sign is when the fax number is still in the footer. That usually is a giveaway.
Absolutely. It's like steering a Titanic, right? For both marketing and for culture, but they do walk so hand in hand with each other that
absolutely.
It's amazing, but at the same time, if you're having trouble steering one of those in the right direction, then more than likely you're having a hard time steering the other, right?
Right.
When there is a bad culture, how long does it take to turn something like that around?
That is a great question. I like that one. It's not quick. It's not an event, right?
Right.
And that's part of the problem that I've seen over the last 2 years in doing this full time is a lot of owners who I talk to and are interested at least in taking that step because they're in that middle bucket. They recognize that they need to make a change, right? But they're embarrassed, so they quietly reach out to me, right? It's not a public reach out. It's not something that they're willing to be too vulnerable with.
Right.
And so if I bring you in, you do your assessment, will my culture be fixed? It's not how that works, man.
Yeah.
In a lot of the clients that I've worked with, we don't see results within 12 months. You see, and this is a weird thing about culture, right? You see engagement changes when there's a cultural change, which lead to productivity changes, which lead to that discretionary effort that you get from employees who are engaged in a healthy culture environment. So you see things, but it's a lot harder to quantify the cultural change until you start benchmarking metrics, right? So if we walk in day one and we say, okay, your spindle utilization is at X, your scrap rates are at Y, your revenues at Z, and those are the most important numbers to your organization, we can start to track where that looks at different stages within your cultural journey.
Sure.
But you're really not going to have a great snapshot of what that looks like within 12 months, right? I mean, you won't be able to say, hey, I had this much change in a short period of time. I do have clients who, within 12 months, we have reduced turnover by over 40%. We've increased revenue per employee by 26 to 29%, right? But that's over a period of time, right? That's not an event. That's not a one-time thing. So if you are curious about changing your culture and what that looks like, the first step is really defining what your culture is now, right? And that can be done through values exercises, mission, vision exercises. Define who you are now, and ask your employees: is this who we are from your eyes, right? That's the first step. If that aligns, then sure, that's where your current culture is. But chances are your employees are going to say, no, we're nowhere close to that.
Never heard of that before.
Yeah, exactly. Innovative. You think we're innovative? I haven't had an idea in 15 years. So that's really the first step is to define that, and then identify where do you want to get, right? If you define who you want to be or who you are, and you don't get that feedback that says, yeah, that's who we are from the employees, and that's who you want to be, great. You've got it defined. We can build that bridge from your current state to future state. But if you say, this is who I think we are, and your employees say, nope, that's not who we are, and you say, okay, good, I don't want to be that company, here's who I want to be, we can also build that bridge for you too, right? So there's a couple of different ways, but it's not a quick event. It's not something that you can just say like I dream of Jeannie, I want a healthy culture, right? It's definitely something that you have to work at, and leadership has to put in a ton of work to make that change happen. It doesn't happen overnight, and they've got to the leadership has to live that culture in order for the employees to then live it as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, there's a lot of like intangibles, like just the soft skills that I think are incredibly important in this. But on the onset, like how do you measure engagement, when you're first like working with a customer or client? Like, I mean, I'm sure there's surveys, like, but how do you get a picture of that? Or like, what questions do you ask?
Yeah, so I do 3 different things. I do individual one-on-one interviews. I start out a assessment. It's a 2-day assessment. My assessment, it's 2 days. I start out by talking with the top level, whoever brought me in at the highest level possible. And we talk about what their perception is of their culture, what they think that the employees' perception is of the culture. Then we bring in the rest of the leadership team, and we go through a lot of those same questions, right? And then I take a tour, and I look for things. I look for how clean is the bathroom? How is there, pardon me, is there recognition on the walls of employees? I look for those things. I also look at when I walk in the door of a facility, I look at the employees themselves. If they turn around and look at me, then typically 9 times out of 10, that's a healthier shop, right? But if they're focused on their work, if they've got their eyes on their shoes, that means that they're afraid to look at you because they've been reprimanded in the past for engaging visitors. So I do the tour, then I do one-on-one interviews where I talk with everybody from leadership team one-on-one to individual employees that I met throughout my tour of the facility. I do a focus group over a lunch. So I identified 25 employees. So if it's smaller than 25, it's everybody. But minus the leadership team, minus the president, minus the owner. I want them to feel very open in having a conversation with me. And I ask questions like, hey, do you feel valued here? Are you happy here? Right? Very pointed questions about employees' experiences there. I wrap up day one with a lot more one-on-one interviews based on the focus groups or based on the focus group that I did. And then day two is all more the quantitative, right? It's the surveys. I bring 10 tablets in, sit down in a break room or a conference room, and the tablets have Candy Crush, Solitaire, and hearts on it, as well as the survey. My job is to not force employees to take the survey. My job is to give them the opportunity and make the case for them having a voice in making changes within the organization. If they choose not to take the survey, that means they're actually very actively disengaged because they don't care enough about the organization to fill out a 10-minute survey, right?
Right.
So I then take all that data, qualitative and quantitative data, I put it together into a cultural brief and then present it to the owner and the leadership team about what I gathered, where they currently are, where they want to be, and how do we get there.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then what do you do with that data then? Like what does the execution look like? Is there like, do you consult or, how do you work through the hard work on their end?
Yeah. So it varies, right? And that's part of the challenge here is there's no out of the box solution for culture. There's really not. There's a lot of great solutions out there, right? You've got, Seki, Mike White from Seki and his performance management platform. That's a great step in the right direction to a healthy culture, but it's not a silver bullet, right? It's not your magic wand that can solve it all. There's Team Force AI, which is a company that has a kiosk that goes up on the wall. And it's an engagement solution for deskless employees. So it's you've been through airports, right? And there's the kiosk in the bathroom. How clean is the bathroom today? It's got, 5 different faces from smiley green to frowny red. Well, Team Force AI's kiosk is the exact same size. You put it on the wall, you ask an engagement question, you're getting real-time data from your deskless employees. It's a great solution. Again, not a magic wand. So there's a lot of different solutions. I provide a lot of training to my clients. I've got 35 different trainings at this point, everything from how to be a active listener to emotional intelligence to what else do I have? Building better teams, building high performance teams, leadership 101, right? So I've got different trainings. So I do workshops for leadership teams. I do lunch and learns for entire, employee populations. I do virtual trainings. I'm a sounding board for some organizations. Something I've recently started doing, and a lot of organizations had a problem with this aspect of performance management, is taking a performance review and turning that into a career development plan, right? So if you're ranking somebody a 3 on any given part of their performance review, part of the performance review should be, what do you need to do to get to a 5? If it's a 1 out of 5, well, you can take that a step further and determine what trainings that employee needs to take in the next 12 months to then get a 5 on their review. Then you're creating a learning plan for that employee, and that helps them with their engagement levels. It helps create that healthier culture because you're providing employees with a pathway versus making them guess what they need to do to be compensated better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that we also started doing at Top Floor related to like culture and career development is not just doing the one time like end of year review, but trying to this year start to have those quarterly where we look back on that assessment from the end of last year and the goals that we set and say like, okay, are we making progress towards this space? Instead of, waiting till an entire year goes by to then bring it back up and say like, oh yeah, like, did you progress in this area or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been
that's huge. And Chad, props to you for doing that. I recommend at least quarterly, but I even have my clients do it monthly. The more and it doesn't have to be an in-depth sit down, right? It can be a 5 to 10 minute stand-up meeting in the hallway or virtually for you guys, right? Where you're just on a Zoom call for 10 minutes. Hey, what are the biggest roadblocks to you achieving these goals? Cool. Let me help you remove them. Done. Right. You don't have to have it be this super in-depth thing, but the more frequently you meet with somebody about their performance review, the higher score they're going to get, the more engaged you're going to have that employee, the more productivity you get out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ann's right. We made a switch from a very formal, long, drawn out annual year-end like process to a quicker, more conversational quarterly, and then also doing either a weekly or a bi-weekly, depending on the team, one-on-one, where we have those types of like quick conversations that are more focused on what's happening right now. What can we help you with right now? What can we fix right now?
That's awesome.
That is more valuable, and it's less time to be honest.
Absolutely.
It takes less time to do that than it did the other way.
And you're going to keep people, right? And that's what every owner, every leader wants. The cost of turnover is so astronomical that you don't want to replace an Ann. Ann's awesome.
No, absolutely never.
The amount of money that you've put into developing Ann to get Ann to where she is now is massive, right? So why would you want to have to start over? And it's the same for machinists. It's the same for operators. It's the same for engineers and programmers. Why would any manufacturer want to start over? If you treat them well, if you provide them with a sustainable career pathway, then you don't have to pay the costs of replacing that person. But they're just so used to doing that. I know a guy, he has a new class of employees starting every 2 weeks, and it's anywhere from 4 to 6 new employees every 2 weeks. He has like a 78% turnover rate. It's ridiculous.
Jeez.
But they've been doing it that way for 20 years. And I mean, they have people come back 3 and 4 times over the course of their careers, work there for, X amount of time. Then they get pissed off and leave. And then they'll come back in 5 years.
How can you even have a culture?
Right.
Let alone a good one when the people are switching every 2 weeks.
I'm surprised that has been sustainable for them. I mean,
they're getting to a point where it's not sustainable anymore. Because now, Glassdoor, for a long time, machinists didn't pay attention to Indeed. They didn't pay attention to Glassdoor reviews. They didn't pay attention to any of that kind of stuff. Now they are. Now, because as the baby boomer generation retires, and we fill the jobs with, let's be real, we skip in Gen X and some of the millennial generation because there aren't enough of us to fill these jobs. But as we get into the late millennials and Gen Zs, they're looking on those platforms. They're so much more data driven in their decision making. and they know where to find that data, and that's why it's such a dangerous place to be if you're not promoting a healthy culture, right?
Even over the last, I want to say 3 years, the questions that I get from interviewees versus what I used to get, no one would ask about benefits or culture or, the intangible things. The benefits are tangible, but the intangible things that aren't a part of a salary package. I get those questions a lot these days. Like, people want to know, what are they getting into? A, because they can be selective because of the labor market, even in our industry, it's tight. And B, because they want to know what they're signing up for.
Absolutely. And you can save a whole lot of time and effort by putting that stuff in a job description.
Just being upfront with it.
Hey, we provide dental, vision, or dental and health, but not vision, or whatever, right? But those have become more of an entitlement than a benefit, right? And so I coach a lot of the people I work with. Don't look at them as benefits. Don't look at it as a nice to have. Look at it as you must provide these things, even if you're under 50 employees, because as you grow, you're going to want to have these put in place, and you're not going to find the people you want if you don't have them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, as you were talking, the other thing on those quarterly or reviews or the touch points with your employees, like the biggest thing, I think, if you could boil it all down, is to just listen. You can't really solve every problem, right? You can't be, especially at larger companies, you can't be so specific with each individual person's needs, but you can listen. Even if you can't solve their problem, sometimes that's all people want, is just someone to be able to talk to about whatever's going on. And that's the biggest thing that I try to tell myself, because I still have some direct reports that I meet with regularly, and it's just, hey, let me just hear you out. Like, I'm your sounding board outside of your, day-to-day world.
Well, and it gives you insight as like a leader too. I feel like then you have that background if they're, not performing in the way that you normally expect. Like, that like, oh, there's like, they mentioned this is going on. So, giving them the benefit of the doubt. But
and every now and then there's a problem I can help solve, and it's like, well, let me make your life easier because I've dealt with that before, because I've been doing this for 12 years instead of your 2. And here's an easier way to look at that.
Well, and along those lines, Chad, and this is what I was going to say, is a lot of leaders need to learn to take their tool belt off, their solution belt off when they're listening to their employees. A lot of times, and this goes to personal lives too, right? I mean, if I try to come up with a solution for everything that my wife comes to me and wants to just be heard about, then I'm not doing my job as the husband, right? I'm not listening and just giving her that place. Same with employees. If as a leader, if you are trying to solve everything that your employees have, every single issue, you're not doing them any service. You become almost a pain to come talk to, because if all they want is somebody to just listen to them, if you come up with a solution to that, then you're not giving them what they look for. So I tend to ask the question, are you looking for advice, a solution, or just to be heard? And 9 times out of 10, they know what they're looking for out of coming to me. So I'm able to then give them what they're looking for when they come to me. But I have to ask that question up front, because if I don't, my automatic response is to put my tool belt on and come up with a solution, right? So
really good
I think that's just something that all the listeners out there should take and use professionally and personally. When somebody comes to you with something that they want to say, ask them what they're looking for out of you, because that'll help guide how you interact with them.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's so smart. The other thing too, and this is more probably on the professional level or as a leader, to try to push them to find the solution on their own. That's something that I've like it's tough to, when they are looking for the answer or the solution and they're just like, can you tell me, or can you show me, can you do it for me? And you just try to be like, well, how would you solve it? Like, well,
Absolutely.
peeling back, because you want them to grow and you want them to be critical thinkers and problem solvers. And that's another, I guess, tip too, is to challenge yourself if you're in that position and you're confronting a problem, to push that person to figure out how to solve it on their own.
Are you talking specifically to me, Anne? Or are you just?
No, I'm mostly talking to myself.
I feel like you were looking right at me. I could feel it.
I could feel it too, and I'm in between you guys on my screen. I don't know how everybody else is seeing this, but I can.
Let me summarize that. Anne said, "Chad, let me figure it out on my own sometime." No,
I mean, I think it's something that like is a challenge for everyone, because the way you communicate to an employee is different than the way you naturally communicate. Like, you have to keep those things in mind, and ask the questions you might not normally ask. You might normally just try to jump in and fix it and solve it, and it's just something that I know that I have to challenge myself to do as well. So,
well, and let's be real. If leaders focused on every problem that their employees have, then they're not doing their job as leaders. Their job as the leader of an organization is to be strategic and take the organization in directions that it needs to go. If you spend all of your time on tactical issues that employees have and don't empower them to think on their own, then you're never going to grow as an organization, right? You're never going to grow as a team. If you start having, let me use an example. I was a leader of a team. I'm not going to mention the company, because then you'll know exactly, you won't, but the person will know exactly that I told this story about them. And I had this employee that would come to me 5 to 6 times a day. We were remote, and they would ask me questions. Here's the problem. What do I do? Here's the problem. What do I do? I spent so much time helping that employee through their own issues that I fell behind on the work that I needed to get done, the things that I needed to deliver on. So I started asking the question, how would you solve that problem? Or what do you think my answer would be? Things of that way nature, right? I didn't exactly answer it the same way every time, but different variations of how would you solve this problem? And pretty quickly, I was getting one phone call a day. Hey, here are the problems that came up today. Here's how I solved them. Fantastic. Thank you for doing that. But it also gave that person the ability to fail without repercussion, right? We're in manufacturing. Failure can mean a lot of different things. It can mean jobs don't get out on time. It can mean scrap rate. It can mean loss of money. It can mean loss of jobs, etc. But you still have to be able to fail within your job, because failure is how people learn, right? So I provided that person the ability to fail. Sometimes they made the wrong choice, but they had the confidence that they weren't going to lose their job if they made a call and they made the wrong call. And then they were able to call me and say, hey, here was the problem. Here's what I did. It blew up in my face. We're now like 6 weeks behind schedule. Here's what I learned. How would you have done it? Right? That's a much different conversation, because that's really guiding that person, right? It's different than having 7 phone calls in a day answering questions.
Right.
Yeah. Allowing them to fail.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So something that you kind of, I mean, we've been touching on this in some capacity, is just kind of like the business case overall for culture. Like you mentioned things like revenue, or just the cost of developing and growing an employee. Is this a case that you have to make often, like when you're talking to people, like,
all the time?
What are the metrics? Like, why should I care?
All the time. And I guess the person who sells it always has the blinders on, right? Because to me, it makes sense. Why wouldn't you want a healthy culture, right? But the stats are out, and right now there is a huge, we have the largest disengaged workforce that we've ever had since engagement's been measured, right? And I'll get to your answer, and I'm setting the stage for it, if you will. there's 77% of employees are disengaged right now in their job. What that means is lower productivity rates in manufacturing. It means more mistakes. It means higher costs to get the job out. The total cost of ownership of manufacturing a part means that's higher, which means that the profits are lower for manufacturers. When you look at turnover, which comes from bad culture, right? Retention, and the converse is turnover. Turnover comes and can cost anywhere from 3 to 4 times the cost of that employee's salary. So when you look at the cost of an employee leaving your organization, it's 3 to 4 times their annual salary, because you got to factor in the time it takes to search for somebody, right? That you've got an HR, or in some cases the owner, posting jobs, doing interviews. So you've got that time. You've got the ramp up time. Once you do hire somebody, you've got to onboard them. If you don't onboard them well, if you don't create that clear training pathway for them, it's going to take longer, which means that they're going to cost you more money before they're making you money, right? So there's so many different factors when it comes to the business case for a healthy culture. So to answer your question directly, those factors are turnover costs, total cost of ownership, productivity rates, things of that nature, which at individual manufacturers, individual companies can mean different things, right? Some companies focus on spindle utilization. Some companies focus on product out the door, their throughput, right? Because they're more of a low mix, high volume type organization. So it'll look different, but there are some key metrics that we do focus on. I focus on turnover rates and revenue per employee. Those are the two that I find encapsulate culture and engagement into one bucket. And we do see TCO's clients have seen on average 40% decrease in turnover and a 26% increase in revenue per employee.
Yeah, that's awesome that you can tie it back to like the bottom line metrics. I think that's what like leaders are always most concerned about, I feel like, or owners is like,
well,
are they making money?
And we talked earlier about, that tangibleness, right, of company culture, of soft skills. And that's been the biggest challenge for leaders, is especially in manufacturing. Leaders in manufacturing are so used to being able to say, hey, I want to buy this $1 million machine. I know that in X amount of time, the ROI will be there because I can run jobs 1, 2, and 3 on it, and it'll pay itself off by X date, right? They look at soft skills. They don't know how to quantify it. They don't know how to quantify company culture and engagement. And so that's when I said earlier that they're afraid of it. It's not necessarily that they're afraid of it. They just don't understand how to measure it. And this is a world of engineers and black and white and quantifiable metrics. And if you can't quantify it, then it doesn't matter, right? So I know that's the biggest problem that manufacturers have with the concept of culture, soft skills, and engagement is it's hard for them to be able to quantify.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Makes total sense. So I want to kind of wrap up by talking about like where you start. So you've now embraced that, okay, maybe I need to look internally and fix things. What are some things that a manufacturing company can start by like examining or looking at? Like you mentioned, for example, like your brand values, like, or your pillars. Like, is that a good starting point? And, are there any others?
Yeah. So every exercise, when I start with a client, first phone call I have is around mission, vision, and values. That's the absolute 100% starting point for every conversation. And that's where and it doesn't have to be manufacturing, but this is geared towards manufacturers. Any company, that's where you should start your cultural journey. Do you have those things defined? And a a lot of times manufacturers don't. They don't know what their mission is, or they may know their mission, but they don't know where they want to be when they grow up. They don't know what that vision statement looks like. And if they do, sometimes they don't know what they stand for, right? Or their values are what they look for in employees, but they're not the values that they have for the organization, right? So there's a lot of different things that they need to look at when talking about their mission, vision, and values. So I'd look at that first, and I would also look at what do your people say, right? If you were to walk into a room or have a third party walk into a room of your employees and ask a question, blanket statement, do you enjoy working here? By show of hands, raise your hand if you enjoy working here. How many hands would go up, right? That's a great starting point. I think that leaders need to look at human-centeredness, right? I'm a big proponent of human-centered leadership, focusing more on the people within the organization than the profitability. If you focus on the people, profits will follow. So look at, how do you treat your employees? Are their bathrooms clean? Do the air conditioners work? Are you celebrating them as employees, publicly and privately? So those are three easy, quick hits that manufacturers could do to at least start the journey.
Cool.
That's great.
Are there any sorry, were you going to ask something, Chad? I don't know.
No, I was just saying that's really good starting point, good feedback.
Yeah. Something I wanted to ask too is just kind of any positive stories that you can share, or either through the podcast or through your working with manufacturing companies. Do you have any stories of just seeing a cultural turnaround, or kind of how have people challenged the status quo, and what were their success stories?
Yeah, so I've got two, and one from both. One of my favorite. I've got two from the podcast. One is hilarious, and one is just a great story. So I'll tell the great story. Steve Tomasi, he's the owner of Boston Centerless in Boston, Massachusetts. He has a large immigrant community that works for him, and he goes so far as to put the flag from every country that is represented in his shop on the shop wall to
awesome.
make them feel like they're home, right? And to give them a connection to that purpose. And I get a lot of emails, for some reason, people who don't even speak English listen to my podcast. So I get a lot of emails from people out of the country who are looking to come to the US because they see it as a land of opportunity and they want jobs in manufacturing. And so people will reach out to me and for the longest time, I didn't know where to send them, right? Because that's a touchy subject, right? There are a lot of people here who need jobs as well, right? And some people can't take people from out of country, can't help them with visas, things of that nature. So I started sending them all to Steve. He's just now my funnel of requests. So that's a very heartwarming one.
Yeah.
Awesome.
The funny one from the podcast, a company called Drop Sprockets up in the Kootenay region of British Columbia, Canada, in the middle of nowhere in the sticks. They ask in their interview process one question that eliminates most candidates, and that is, what is your favorite comedy movie? And if candidates can't answer that in a way that aligns with the people who already work there, then they don't get the job. And and I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Devin, the manager or supervisor I spoke with there on the podcast, he told me the story of how they were looking for a shop manager, and they asked that question in the interview process. And this guy was the best candidate on paper, And he said, well, that's a dumb question. Why would you ask that? This is an interview. And he didn't get the job. He was the best candidate on paper, but he didn't align with them well enough to be able to answer that question, right? So I thought that was hilarious, but also very cool way to weed out some of the bad candidates. From the consulting side, I have a client who, when I started with them, the 12 months before I started working with them, they had 12 out of 20 employees leave. So they had 12 people. So massive turnover over the course of the 12 months prior to me starting with them. 12 months after I started with them, they grew their sales. They hit their revenue goals, and they only lost 3 people. So they had a massive turnaround. Their people are now more engaged. They feel like they have purpose. They feel like they're connected to the work that they're doing. It's just a really heartwarming story. So they're doing a great job. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
A lot to be proud of, Jim.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, those are kind of all the questions I have. And we're just at about time. Do you have anything else, Chad, you wanted to ask, or?
No, I don't think so. This was amazing. Just both from a content standpoint and just talking to you, Jim. I think we could talk probably all day. That's how I felt the number of times you've been on a call.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this has been great.
This has been awesome. I enjoyed being on this side of the questions a lot more than I thought I was going to. Thank you very much for having on. But I do think that we could just talk all day. I mean, that's the joy of some of these conversations is you almost have to be like, well, we've got to end it somewhere. It can't just be an indefinite interview. But this was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And just shout out again to the Manufacturing Culture podcast. You can find it, I'm thinking, everywhere that podcasts can be found.
Yeah,
and any other ways that people can reach out or get in touch with you, Jim, and LinkedIn or?
Yeah, LinkedIn is usually the easiest and less filtered way to get a hold of me. My email, sometimes people go to junk mail and all that kind of fun stuff. Find me on LinkedIn. You can find me as Jim James Mayer on LinkedIn. Just look for Jim or James Mayer. Otherwise, yeah, podcast is great. I've got 2 websites, Manufacturing Culture Podcast website and TCOstrategies.com. You can get me on either one of those.
Fantastic. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again, and we'll talk to you all later.
Thank you.